So a very good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back to another video. And in this one I want to touch on my favourite micro 4K edge feature, my OM System OM1 Mark II. It is of course the Live ND. What is it? How does it work? And can you use it with other filters? Well, let's take a few pictures of the North Sea at Baitson Beach and I'll explain all that in this video. So I'm going to take this first photograph and I'm going to demonstrate the use of a physical ND filter and the Live ND, all while doing my favourite thing, which is standing ankle deep in the North Sea. So we have the rock wall here at Mappleton, which is always a fun subject for long exposure photos, and there is a big boulder that has just fallen away from the rock wall, and we're just using that as a foreground interest while the tide is still sloshing around it. So I have ND6410 on in the camera. That is a simulated 6-stop filter, and how that works is the camera takes a series of photographs correctly exposed over the period of time that you plug into the camera, which for me is 60 seconds. So to summarise that, the camera is going to take a series of properly exposed photographs over 50 seconds. But to help get the long exposure during the midday harsh light that we've got on now, I've thrown a 10-stop filter on, which is going to lengthen the shutter speed of the individual photos. So you can think of this as a series of short long exposures all put together in camera to create a 60-second long exposure. Let's go ahead, let's take this first photograph and I'll show you how it turns out. So I'm down at 60 seconds, f4, ISO 200. I'm focused right on the big boulder, right in the foreground. Here we go, 2-second timer. I'll show you how it looks. So through my experience of using Live ND for some time on this now, there are great use cases for it, and there are times when you should use it as an added extra and not rely on it solely. So for instance, if you're out shooting a waterfall, Live ND it's going to do you. You're going to get the long exposure look that you want for photographing a waterfall. Waterfalls, you only really need a couple of seconds, so throwing one of the lighter ND filters on, 2, 3, 4 stops, that will give you around 5 seconds. You get all of the movement in the waterfall, and you can always slap a polarizing filter on the front of this as well, just to take all of the shininess and reflections from everything that may be white and shiny around your waterfall. Coming out in the middle of the day like I'm doing now, it's best to use physical ND filters and use the Live ND just to slow your shutter speed down. That's a really hard phrase to say. Just to slow your shutter speed down a little bit if you're not quite getting the exposure times that you want. Now I know you could always throw a physical ND filter on there, an extra filter, but I always find less glass equals sharper images. It's just a personal preference of mine, but I tend to start with a 10-stop ND filter and then just tweak things using the Live ND. So when I first started taking that photograph behind me, I went all in, 7 stops. But that was way overkill. It was coming out too underexposed, too dark. It needed brightening up a little bit. So at that point, through trial and error, you just reduce the Live ND filter, and I found 5 stops, or 6 stops. I think it was 6 stops. 6 stops works fine for what I was trying to do. If you're out in sunrise, if you're out at sunset when the light is nice and low, then you could possibly get away without using a physical ND filter and just relying solely on the Live ND at its maximum setting, and adjust things with your aperture. But I have an aperture that I prefer, which is f5.6, so I always try and base my long exposures around that and throw the filters and the Live ND to compensate and get the shutter speeds that I want. But you don't always have to go for the 60-second exposure. You can do something a little bit shorter, especially during this time of day, maybe a second and a second and a half, just to show some movement in the waves, and that's where we're going to go next. We're going to ditch the physical ND filters and rely solely on the Live ND, and let's see how that turns out. So I've moved a little bit further out into the water, and there's just this rock that is getting swirled around by the sea, and as the white water sort of rushes and swirls back around it, it leaves really fun textures and patterns around it, and that's what we're going to try and take a photograph of here. So we're down at a second's worth of exposure time, but sadly there is one filter that you're not going to be able to replicate using Live NDs, and that's a polarizing filter. I've thrown a polarizing filter on because this rock is quite dark and it's also quite wet and there's a lot of reflections coming off it. So in order to cut through that, I've just put the polarising filter on and rotated it enough to take the shine off of it. So I'm just waiting for the tide to retreat just a little bit so we can see some more of the rock, which seems to have happened now. But we're just using the live ND, the ND 128. I'm going to focus on this rock if I can see through it. I'll use the EVF. There we go. So I've focused on the rock, so I know that the rock is in focus. I'm down at f13, which is underexposed. I don't know how that's happened. There we go. We're down f7.1. 1 second worth of exposure and ISO 200. And like I say, the ND 128. So as all of that white water swirls around, the tripod move, that's really annoying. We'll try that again. Like I say, it's a 1 second exposure. So the camera is going to take photographs, properly exposed photographs, over 1 second, and just produce that long exposure look by stacking photographs. Very similar to how you do light trails or star trails if you do astrophotography, only the camera's doing it for you. There's no need to use Lightroom or Photoshop. Here's this final photograph taken exclusively with the live ND and the polarising filter. Right, so I've told you all about how you actually use the feature, but how do you actually access it on the camera? Well, you press the menu button and you scroll across computational modes, and you can see it right there, live ND shooting. You see it's turned on. If I go into the menu, you can turn it off and you can turn it on. So I have it turned on. You're going down to ND number. This is where you choose the strength of the simulated ND filter. You see it goes all the way from 2, which is 1 stop, all the way through to ND 128. They haven't quite got to 10 stop filters yet, but I'm hoping that may come in the future in a firmware update, because that would be really useful. You also have LV simulation. I have this turned off. This simulates the long exposure on the back of your camera, and it really slows the frame rate down on the live view. I don't like it. It looks it's a bit jarring, it's a bit janky. You can see there, slow shutter speed effect can be seen in live view, differs from final image. So that will show you all of the movement in the waterfall. It will essentially blur it out if you're shooting a waterfall, but I don't like it, so I just leave it turned off. So my live view screen looks normal, everything's in real time, and I just find it slightly less jarring when turning the simulation on. Alright, so what about them photographers out there who like to get really creative with their photography? Well, I'm going to demonstrate something to you right now. I still have the polarising filter on here. Polarising filters help, in a sense. I like to think of them as a one-stop filter. They do block a little bit of light, and it does help slow a shutter speed down. But what are those people who do like to get creative and like to create their motion blur photos, you know, that intentional camera movement? Well, I don't need to throw a physical ND filter on here. Now, I'm quite fortunate. My filter kit that I use at the moment is a Nissi JetMag Pro. It's a magnetic filter kit and all the filters around on it. But for those people that use the square filter kits, I like to do this kind of thing. Sometimes it can be a bit bulky and a bit janky and a bit awkward looking. So I have no physical ND filters on here. I'm down at ND 128. A 2 second exposure is turned in. And I'm going to try and create a motion blur photograph of the sky and the sea. I know a lot of people like to do this kind of photography. It's not something that I really do, but in order to demonstrate the feature, I may as well have a go at it. I've got 8 stops of IBIS in this. I don't know how that's going to react to this. It's probably going to fight it. We may have to turn it off. Well, let's see. One shot, one take. Let's find out. So, I'm going to focus on the horizon. There's no real point in doing this though. I have, let's have a look, 2 seconds, F22 just to do it. And let's go. So, pressing the shutter button, moving and going. And let's have a look. Alright, the look's there. I wonder if I maybe need to move a little bit faster though. Let's have a look. This is going to look really silly. Go. All the way around. Let's see how this turns out. Well, it's interesting. So I'm hoping now that I'm going to be able to put all of this together and take a really long exposure photograph from something you maybe hang on a wall, which means I'm going to have to scramble up this. I'm going to do it in one take because the camera's there. Let's go. There. Right, so I've made it. I'm hoping the microphone is still picking me up. The idea here is to use the rock wall as a leading line to the beacon out at the end. The tide is still surrounding this rock wall, so we're going to get that smoked out, smoothed out water all around it. I'm not really comfortable with where I'm stood. My ankle's really hurting, but we've got a 60-second exposure on the go. So I'm using the ND128, the simulated 7-stop filter in the camera. I'm using a 10-stop filter just to slow that initial shutter speed down. So like I've said, all of the photographs that the camera are taking now is a series of smaller and shorter long exposures all combined to create the 60-second exposure. I'm using a polarizing filter just to take a little bit of shine off the water, and it's also going to cut through some of the glare in the clouds as well, which will give a little bit more definition in the sky. Hopefully this photo's taken, because right now, ankle really hurting. If you've ever been to Mappleton Beach and stood on this thing, you know exactly what I want to. That looks lovely. Here it is. So, has Live ND eliminated the use of these? No, it has not. It's a fantastic tool for aiding in the use of them, and it's a fantastic get out of jail free card if you're out, you don't have any with you, and you just want to try and get a long exposure photograph, then use it. There are use cases where it's fantastic. Like I said, waterfalls, you can use it on its own. Sunrise and sunset, you can get away with using it on its own. You still may need to use a polarizing filter. But if you really want to get that long exposure look, especially in the middle of the day, you're still going to need to buy physical ND filters. Here's what it is. But this camera, this OM System OM1 Mark II, for somebody that loves and enjoys long exposure photography, it's just a fantastic tool. It's all in there, but use it as a tool, use it as an aid, and don't let the traditional techniques of doing long exposure photography, don't let them die out with it. Keep these things in your camera bag and use the camera as an aid and an assist. So thank you very much, Lee, for watching today's video, and I hope I was able to help give some kind of understanding of how to use Live ND, when's the best time to use Live ND, how Live ND works, and how you can combine it using physical ND filters to create some really fun long exposure photography. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up and a like, because it does help bring new viewers to see my content. And if you're new here and see me for the very first time, why not drop me a subscribe down below, and you'll see more micro four thirds nonsense every single week. So until the next time, I'm going to love you and leave you and just say peace and goodbye.